Got 1 minute.
And it's now.
It's now. Welcome, everybody. So this is the Drupal Security Team panel. We're going to go through some slides. There's a bunch of hidden slides in here, and we're looking for folks to ask questions as we go. We will actually stop and try to answer questions as we go, depending on what they are. If we're going to cover them later on, we will hold until we cover them in the slides. Drupal Security Team here, the pictures. This may be, no, actually, I think this is still accurate.
A couple people, it's like missing Drew and stuff.
Oh, it is missing Drew. Okay, so it is missing. Yeah, it was. I tried to fix that earlier today and got stuck in Photoshop World, and my graphic designer was not available. So sorry, Drew, if you're in the audience. I'd like to welcome everybody to this session. For those of you who are not familiar, the security team is a volunteer group across the Drupal project, and we work towards focusing on notification, education, and security within the project itself. As I said earlier today, earlier as in 1 minute ago, this is going to be an interactive session, and so I'd like folks to introduce themselves quickly with their favorite type of cookie. So if you're attending the session, go ahead and just give us your favorite type of cookie in the chat. If you're a panelist in this session, we're going to go around and tell each other our names and our favorite types of cookies. I'm Michael, and my favorite type of cookie is a warm chocolate chip cookie. Greg, let's go to you next.
Peanut butter with a chocolate in the middle, warm, preferable, maybe with a little bit of salt on it, and Greg Canadison, aka Greggles. And
let's jump over to Angie.
Hi, Angie Webchick Byron. COVID-19 is giving me nice flowing locks. My favorite cookie is the Girl Scout cookie called a Samoa, and it is like a bunch of coconut drizzled in caramel, drizzled in chocolate, and it is awesome.
Let's jump to Jess.
My name is Jess. I'm XJM on Drupal.org, and I have difficulty picking a favorite cookie, but I would say that my default cookie is like the perfect chocolate chip cookie. Not too crunchy, but freshly made. And also a fan of peanut butter chocolate chip. And then there's also like a lemon ginger cookie I make with tofu. That's a very summery, wonderful thing. So those three, I don't make the cookie a lot that has the lemon and the ginger. So chocolate chips are the default things. You could get nice chocolate chips from anyone. That was a very long way to answer a single question.
Neil, let's jump to you.
Neil Drum. I am Drum on Drupal.org, chocolate chip.
Sam.
Tea cakes, which are also the same as Mexican wedding cakes, I think.
And a guest joining us for some of our content today is Tim from the DA. Tim, why don't you go ahead and give us your favorite type of cookie?
My favorite type of cookie is the kind that is on the outside of an ice cream sandwich. It almost doesn't matter what kind, but
change my answer to your answer. That sounds amazing. Yes, +1.
Okay, and yes, and okay. So moving along with slides, we often get questions as to what the security team does, and so I put together a nice bulleted list of what we do. We go through and we keep track of all the security issues reported to the project, and we work them through our process, which I'll get into in a second. We push along fixes to the vulnerabilities, and that terminology may sound weird because we don't actually write, most of the time, we don't actually write code that fixes the problem. We help others in coordinating writing of said code. We will help with security-related Drupal initiatives. We'll coordinate with other open source security teams. We'll get into this a little bit later on, but in the world of Composer, we are tightly integrated with other projects. And so we often have to coordinate with other security teams in getting things fixed. We read and respond to messages sent to security@drupal.org. We track the trends of hacked sites, and we really like community education like this session here. In this vein, there's some things we don't actually do. The security team, as it's charged, does not actively go out and find vulnerabilities. Now, there are members of our team, Sam here, for example, who does do that, and he's going to talk a little bit about that later on. But we, as a team, don't go through and wake up one morning and assign modules to people to go and review line by line. We don't review maintainers' code, and we don't help fix hacked sites. Now, there are lots of team members on the team who do these things, but as an overall team, we don't actually take these tasks on. Our workflow looks something like this. I'm not great at making these charts, but typically we'll get a vulnerability that gets reported to the team. And we do a first pass at validating that vulnerability. Does it seem to be a valid vulnerability? Do we have the steps needed from the reporter to reproduce it? Is it something that we are going to fix? So, we'll often get a vulnerability reported that an admin can use the full HTML component to run JavaScript on a site. Well, they're an admin user, so that's not really a vulnerability from our perspective. So we're not going to fix that. Once we validate that the vulnerability is a valid vulnerability or seems to be a valid issue, we will invite the maintainer to join us. And the maintainer and the security team, and often the reporter of the vulnerability, kind of work through, is this still really a valid vulnerability? If it is, we'll work to fix it. We'll get a patch ready to go. We'll write the security advisory, which you get on Wednesdays, and we'll work towards releasing that vulnerability. Sometimes the maintainer comes in and says, actually, no, this isn't valid, in which case maybe it's a public issue because it's a security hardening and not actually a vulnerability. The output of most of this work you will see on Wednesdays. On Wednesdays, we, for the most part, release these security advisories and publish the patches and send emails and Twitter announcements. And so this occurs Wednesday at about 4 p.m. UTC. And for core, it is the third Wednesday of the month. And we try not to do contrib releases within that window. Sometimes they happen, but as a goal, we try not to do that. So how do you know about what we're doing? Well, there's a couple places to follow us. Twitter, email. If you like RSS feeds or you like reading web pages, which most people, I assume, in this group are familiar with these terminologies. And then Drupal Slack, there's a security questions channel where we, sometimes in real time-ish, Greg will post updates as to what's happening there. So, what other things do we get involved in within the community? We are involved in the Drupal 7 extended support. We're also involved in the Drupal 6 version of that program, Drupal Steward, and a little bit with the Automatic Updates Initiative. And I'm going to talk a little bit about these, and then I'm going to stop talking and let other people talk. Greg, do you want to talk about the end of life? Maybe.
Sure. So this has been a fairly long time coming. Drupal 7 has been around and powers many, many, many sites, but it's about time for it to reach its so-called end of life. We talk about how at that point it's more likely that zero-day exploits will get published to the public rather than getting reported directly to the team. There's a process that has been refined now over several core end-of-life cycles where all of the contributed projects, so modules, themes, things like that have a Drupal 7 release, those will get marked as not being supported, but the individual maintainer can go back and add support for Drupal 7 if they so choose. This is just sort of to require them to actively indicate that they are still supporting the Drupal 7 version of it. It is, of course, a best practice, and it's encouraged to stay on the most recent supported release of software. So people should be moving forward with Drupal 8, or of course, Drupal 9 is really where folks should be targeting their migration at this point. We had a plan to end of life Drupal 7 at one point, and that's now been extended to November of 2022. Yay! Hopefully that's mostly good news to folks. This just sort of made sense as a lot of different people's focuses have been changed in 2020 as budgets have been cut and people don't necessarily have the budget to pay for a big migration all the way to Drupal 8 or 9 at this point. It seemed like a prudent thing to help provide extra support to the community throughout 2022 instead of just 2021.
So one of the things that will happen in November of 2022 is we'll have extended support vendors that will come in and actually take up the mantle of providing security updates for sites who are not able to move or are still in the process of moving to Drupal 9 at that point, or Drupal 10. I've gone through and gotten rid of all the clean URLs in this presentation because it's easier to type in a number than it is to type a really long URL. So I've turned off clean URLs for this presentation. So if you're interested in becoming a vendor, here's the URL. There's an application process to go through. So far, our vendors that have been accepted into this are located here. I don't think I've forgotten anybody, but if I did, I will update this. And so out of curiosity from the chat, I'm interested to know, has anybody ever had a site compromise? That's question 1. And 2, if so, do you know exactly how it got compromised? And so if you're willing to share that information with this group, it doesn't have to be a Drupal site. Any site out there counts. Have you ever had a site compromised? And if so, do you know how it got compromised? And so far we have one answer. I can say yes and yes to both of those questions. Angie, have you ever had a site compromised?
My own, yeah.
Do you know how it got compromised?
What's that?
Do you know how it got compromised?
Not entirely. Basically had to burn the whole thing down and start all over again. Yeah. It was one of those very sad situations where it's like, I realize that's a problem, but I got Drupal stuff to handle over here, and it kind of sat there longer than I'd like.
So it's really interesting. I can totally tell there's a delay on the video based on the chat responses, which is kind of cool. So it's interesting to see how we have sites that get compromised. And for the most part, sites get compromised through some type of vulnerability. And a vulnerability is effectively a weakness in your code, in your configuration, in your site setup, in your password that an attacker can leverage. And so as the security team, this is what we're interested in. And we're interested in these vulnerabilities, these weaknesses within Drupal itself, and also within the Drupal ecosystem. And as I'm looking through the chat and trying to talk at the same time, I'm seeing the word outdated show up a lot. And this is interesting because the security team publishes these announcements on Wednesdays, and we really want folks to update their sites, because the easiest way for an attacker to compromise your site is to use a vulnerability with known weaknesses. And so, here's a list of vulnerabilities that are out there. This is not an exhaustive list by any means. There's a wonderful presentation that Peter does called Cracking Drupal that goes through and in detail shows these, exactly how they're attacked and what you can do to prevent it. But for the most part, attackers attack sites based on 2 factors. They really, really want into that specific site for whatever reason. And so they are doing a targeted attack against a specific site. Or they want into a lot of sites, as many sites as they can get, to put spam links or to search for Bitcoin. And in those instances, they will actually go after weak, mostly sites that have not been updated because they're easy. They're easy targets. One of the things I'd like to take a side loop for, though, is how does a security researcher actually find vulnerabilities? And so, if WordPress fixes something, hypothetically, and you don't update your WordPress site, then an attacker can really easily figure out, well, is this site vulnerable to that attack? But how do you find new vulnerabilities that people haven't quite discovered yet? And so I'm going to turn this over to Sam for a second, and Sam's going to talk about how he, as a security researcher, finds security vulnerabilities. And so this is Sam.
Thanks, Mike. So I'm on the Drupal security team, and I'm also an independent security researcher. I've been using Drupal for like 7 years or something like that, and started doing security research maybe 5 years ago, and have found a lot of bugs. So this is just some of them, but you can see that I have a lot in core, and I'm going to tell you how I did it. So we can go to the next slide. Yeah, so basically at a really high level, what security research is about identifying bugs. They're not necessarily security related, but basically finding some entry point or bug. Most of the time, this is associated with user input, like a form or a query parameter. Then you use that bug to trigger an exploit. And then a lot of times you stop and you go back and you figure out how it happened. So it's a lot easier to like exploit a site than to understand how you were able to. So you go back, you figure it out, and then usually you make some report. If you're doing this professionally, it looks really good. If you're not, it might be like a step-by-step guide on how to exploit a site. And then, yeah, then you submit it to someone. Go to the next slide. Cool. So yeah, we skipped the automated slide, right?
I moved it.
Okay, that's fine. So the way I do security research is like really old school or bad. I'm not sure how to describe it, but basically I do security research really manually. Because Drupal's open source and because I can read the source code, I use like local searching tools like grep to identify strings that could be related to security vulnerabilities. And then I literally read all of the code associated with it. So that means like if grep finds something, I read the file that result is in. I read all the code that calls that, and I keep going back until I reach user input or I reach some place that I understand, and then I actually start the process of trying to exploit it. Yep, so you can go to the next slide. So just for an example of this, Drupal has like really, really good cross-site request
Sam,
forgery. Yep.
Can you tell us what cross-site request forgeries are?
Yeah. So a CSRF or a cross-site request forgery is basically when another site is able to execute a request to your site, your Drupal site, on the behalf of another user. So this usually happens in the form of like a literal like cross-site AJAX request. It can happen through form requests. It can happen through like an image tag that loads a path on your site that triggers something. But the point is they're using an admin or a higher privilege user session to do something on your site that they weren't supposed to do. So Drupal's really good at protecting this. So every form has something called a form token, which is a way of preventing CSRF. So pretty much every form you build in Drupal is already protected, which is great. But that means that every form you built yourself or every like route that you've made, let's say you made like a custom API or something that looks like REST, but it isn't REST, is actually vulnerable to this unless you explicitly use a CSRF token. So you can do this by adding a certain thing to your routing file. You can also use the CSRF APIs yourself manually, but a lot of people don't. And so the example command you can use to find this is literally look at every routing file and then grep for something that seems vulnerable. I know that's hard, but maybe like admin, edit, delete, something like that. And then this grep command, I'm looking at the 5 lines after the path. This is like really lazy, but basically it's going to show me a part of the route definition. And if I don't see CSRF token there, I'm going to start diving in. So again, this seems like really manual, but this is a really good way to find vulnerabilities. So you can go to the next slide. Okay, cool. So, yep.
Well, cross-site scripting.
Yeah, so XSS or cross-site scripting is basically a way that an attacker executes JavaScript code on your site, again, on the behalf of another user. So a typical exploit will do something like use the current user's cookie or just current session to like make malicious requests. So the end result might look a lot like a CSRF, but that's typical. You can also use it to phish by just like showing content they didn't expect or tricking them to enter a password. So Drupal protects against this really well. Like there's XSS filtering everywhere. And with Twig, there was a huge amount of protection because we enabled auto escape. So this means that even if you put user input like raw into Twig, it's safe. I mean, don't do that, but without thinking a bit. But yeah, it's safe. Now there's a way to get around it, and it's the raw filter. So the reason you would use raw is if, let's say, you had like an HTML string that you were passing to Twig, and you wanted to render that string exactly. Maybe you know it's trusted, or an admin entered it, something like that. Another reason you use raw is because you're like a lazy developer, and you were trying to work around a bug with like double escaped ampersands, or you just don't understand XSS filtering and you just want to output user HTML. So knowing this, you can do a similar sort of search with Bash. So you can find every twig template, and then I'm piping that to grep and basically looking for any instance of raw in a template. This regex is like maybe too complicated. You could literally just look for the string raw and probably find results. And then from that, look at every one and then go back again. Be like, okay, here's this variable. I know it's unsafe, but can users actually use that? Can they actually like exploit it? And go to the next one. So yeah, you may be like looking at this and wondering why like a robot can't do this job. I think it probably can in a lot of cases, but static analysis is really hard. And Drupal is so proprietary. I know people use that as the antithesis of open source, but it is. There's so many like special Drupalisms we use that static analysis can't really like look at a route, feel like it's dangerous, and then say it doesn't have a CSRF token. That's like a human or like an artificial intelligence job. And another reason you can't automate it well is that it requires a lot of entry points. You know, if you have a bug in a twig template, you can't go up a call chain from that. Twig template isn't PHP code, so you have to actually see where is it used, which could be in a million places in Drupal, and then you have to see how the variables get there. So it's actually very difficult to automate this kind of research, and that's why it works. That's why I'm able to find stuff. So basically, if you can use an automated solution, do it. There's tools like Burp Suite, SonarQube. There's static analysis tools like, yeah, here we go. Like the Coder module. You can also use PHP-CS with a ton of security extensions. These are all great, especially as part of like your SDLC, or that just means like the life cycle of how you review software. But you know, if everyone did that, and no one did this sort of manual work, no one would find these bugs. Like the reason I'm able to find the bugs that other people don't is because automated scans can't find everything. So, so yeah, and then, so I kind of skipped ahead, but a huge thing to do beyond using automated solutions is make this a part of your PR approval process. You probably already approve based on visual regression testing, maybe automated tests, maybe performance budgets. Just add security in there. It doesn't have to be a CI job. It just has to be like a senior dev reading a junior dev's code. And don't be afraid to manually review code. You know, if PHP-CS says you're okay and Coder says you're okay, don't like fully trust that. You know, you need another like human step in your process. Yeah, like I said before, if we all did research the same way, like in the right way, in the automated way with fancy tools, like research would be very boring. It would mean that everyone had the same results and we don't find anything else. So be creative and try different things when you do research.
So
And that's it.
Also review the automated tools results, because there will be a lot of false positives in there. The security team gets a lot of reports that are just someone's output out of an automated tool, and they didn't actually verify that the suspicious thing that they found is an actual vulnerability. So as Sam said, human important, even when you're using the automated tool.
And we're happy to get those reports, but we also will not triage them for you.
So as I mentioned earlier, one of the ways to prevent compromised sites is to update your site. And Drupal has been working on an auto updates initiative. There is a session about that tomorrow from 15 to 1 UTC. I can't do the conversions in my head, but if you pull up the DrupalCon schedule and give it your time sheet or give it your time zone, it will convert it for you.
If you're in North America, it's tonight, this evening, not tomorrow. If you're in Europe, it's tomorrow, or if you're in India, Australia, etc.
Thank you for the conversions. You know, one of the things that comes up a lot with security is this term best practices, and we've got a bunch of slides on these. I'm not going to go through them in too deep comments here, but you know, I often link this to brushing your teeth. Most people brush their teeth daily. Most people spend 2 minutes a day, maybe 4, maybe 8, brushing their teeth. You can't decide that you're gonna, 4 minutes a day brushing your teeth, there's 30 days in a month. You can't decide you're going to brush your teeth on the last day of the month. You have to do it daily, otherwise it doesn't work. And if you skip doing it for a year, you're going to have to pay a lot more, both in time and also in literal pain. And so, brushing your teeth is a best practice. We all agree that we should all brush our teeth. Security is kind of the same way. You can't just have a checklist and be done. It is an ongoing process. As Sam alluded to, it needs to be part of your process. Andrea?
I just thought I'd stop lurking. Sorry to disturb you. Hello?
I'm not sure how you got into this. Okay, I'll keep going.
Go don't let me disturb you.
Okay.
Are we not supposed to turn our cameras
Can you
on?
drop off so just the panelists are here? I don't want it to overwhelm people.
Oh,
Okay. So just keeping in mind, everyone's got to keep working at it. It's not a one-time task, which is why I'm hoping everybody brushes their teeth. Some of the things, I don't know, Tim at the DA, if you could look into this would be helpful.
Yes, I'll look into why people aren't brushing their teeth immediately. No, I get you.
It appears the room isn't moderated. So one of the things that we've been working on is a service from the Drupal Association and the security team that kind of help with this gap between when an individual or when an update gets patched and when you as an individual site owner can patch your site. And we've called this Drupal Steward, and it is a web application firewall that will protect you from certain vulnerabilities before the vulnerability is disclosed and the update is released, and afterwards. So there's this gap that exists between the security team at Wednesday around noon Eastern time publishes a patch, and you have the ability to download that patch and apply it to your site. That's what this program is designed to fix. And so, what we've done here is this. This is a middle tier that will that is. I'm sorry. There's background noise now. Andrew, would you mind dropping off the panel, because I think you're putting background noise into the chat. Thank you. There we go. So, this only works with highly critical core vulnerabilities. We may expand it in the future. And there are some types of vulnerabilities that you can't necessarily protect against with a WAF rule. And so what does this happen? How does this actually work? Well, like in the original diagram I showed, the security team gets a vulnerability reported to us, and we've identified it as a highly critical vulnerability. So, for example, in 2018, the second vulnerability of the year would have qualified for this. It was a highly critical vulnerability, and it was mass exploitable. The security team determines whether or not we can actually mitigate this within a WAF rule set. And if it can be, we will publish a PSA, and in the PSA, we will actually very clearly indicate that this is going to be covered by Drupal Steward. When the security team is going to release a highly critical vulnerability, we do publish, a public service announcement a few days in advance of releasing the vulnerability to let people know that, this is special, you need to pay attention here. And so in that public service announcement, we would include if this would be mitigated by Drupal Steward. Drupal Steward WAF rules will get communicated to our partners, and we'll put them on in monitor-only mode. So what that does is they're there, but we want to see if there's any false positives. Once we review those logs, we make refinements to the rules. Are there false positives? Do we changes? Or is there a zero-day exploit of this vulnerability? That can also happen. And then finally, right before we release the final patch, we'll turn the rules to be in enforcing mode, mitigating the vulnerability. What this does is it lets you as a site owner have a little bit more time between patching your site and the release of that vulnerability. So, if noon Eastern is not a good time for you to be up and making changes to your Drupal site, then this would give you a little bit more time. We're thinking about 3 tiers of this. And the idea behind this is we want to make sure there's a community level tier for this so that it's not just for all enterprise customers, because it sounds like a very enterprisey service. We are having a community level tier. We're going to price that as close to cost as we can get it. There's a standard tier for people who are, self-hosted, and then there's our enterprise tier, which is going to have, the Acquiesce and the Pantheons are the founding partners of this. Tim, do you have anything else to say about this before I move on?
Yeah, the only other thing I'll say is that we're going to be following up after the conference with more information. So there'll be a blog post that has some more details about this. Again, the primary goal here is that we want to protect sites from having to do that urgent update, protect people from falling through the cracks, especially if they're international or on these large teams that have change management processes that don't let them sit in the security Slack channel to wait until the patch is released, right? We really want to save people that time. And we wanted to help the small site owners too. So we're really focusing on that cost element. There'll be more information soon, so just keep an eye out on the Drupal.org blog.
And Tim, while you're here, would you mind taking this slide as well?
Oh yeah, so certainly people are going to ask, why isn't this a free service? Why isn't this something that we can just do for anybody and just make it part of what we do? The issue is, when it comes to open source and supporting open source programs, the code, of course, is free. That's part of the principle of free and open source software. But services are not free to a nonprofit association trying to provide them, right? It's even like our Drupal CI testing service, which we don't charge, costs us many thousands of dollars a month. In this particular case, because this is an enhancement, you can get the patch the normal way. You can take advantage of the automated updates initiative once it comes around, but this will give you extra peace of mind. And to pay for that service, we're asking for a small fee to try and cover that. And additional proceeds, particularly from larger sites using the service or from our founding partners, are being used to help fund Drupal Association and security team programs. So we really want to make sure that that helps both diversify our revenue and enhance what this team can do. So that's why we're charging, hopefully not too much, as close as we can to what's affordable for folks out there, but it will be a small amount.
And the reason why we can't share these WAF rules with everybody and other vendors who are not in the circle of trust we've kind of established here is the WAF rules effectively disclose the vulnerability in a very easy to attack manner. So if someone like Sam were to get a hold of the WAF rules we had written, it would save them a lot of time with grepping through source code.
Someone with Sam who's a little less white hat.
Correct.
Making a sense from there.
If you're interested,
save your site from Sam. No, I'm just kidding.
Ooh, next year's hat. If you're interested in learning more, either as a site owner or as a potential partner, we have a Drupal.org URL, again, with the clean URLs. Clean URLs disabled. There's also a Slack channel where we are discussing this. So the Drupal Steward Slack channel is a great great place for questions on this topic. Next, Jess.
Yeah. So, by the way, I just want to address something that with my comment earlier. There's a suggestion in the chat to stop using white hat and black hat. I absolutely agree. I should have thought of that before I said it. I apologize. I think that we have alternate suggestions somewhere, but I'll look into it. But not right now, because I'm going to tell you a little bit about Drupal Composer and the PHP release cycle. Just go to the next slide, Michael. So yeah, my name is Jess, but I'm better known as XJM on Drupal.org. And I'm part of a team of about 10 Drupal core committers who can review and commit everyone's patches. We're the only ones that can accept those changes into the core project so that anyone in the world can contribute a patch review a patch, decide the patch is ready for commit, but only the 10 of us can actually merge the change into core. And within that team, I'm one of the 2 active release managers. The release managers are the people who actually tag the Drupal 8 and 9 sites that you can install on your Drupal 7, 8, and 9 sites, I should say, that you can install on your sites each month, as well as set schedules, evaluate the potential disruption of changes, and so on. I've helped coordinate all the security and minor releases we've had for Drupal 8 and 9 to date, as well as the major release of Drupal 9. And I've personally rolled a majority of the security releases myself. So when your Drupal site says security update required, you can probably kind of think of that as me saying hi. I work for Acquia, and I'm part of the awesome Drupal acceleration team there, so I get paid. It's my full-time job, which is fantastic, and I love doing it. Next slide, thanks. So back in the day, Drupal didn't really have any external dependencies other than jQuery. But in 2015, we released Drupal 8, which is basically a complete refactoring of Drupal. It also sets the precedents that we're using for Drupal 9 and Drupal 10 and so forth. And Drupal 8 relies on a number of external composer dependencies, including Symfony, Twig, and a few Zen framework libraries, among many other things. So the diagram on the slide is an illustration that Cash Williams made of Drupal 8.7's composer dependencies. I haven't had a chance to update this yet, but we have changed and added a few more dependencies in Drupal 8.9 and 9 now. Next slide. So we coordinate all those dependencies you saw on the screen. When we issue security releases, we issue security releases not only for vulnerabilities in Drupal's own code, but for vulnerabilities in our upstream dependencies that Drupal exercises. So if, for example, there's a vulnerability in Symfony that causes a vulnerability in Drupal, we coordinate with Symfony to make sure that we release on the same day, within a few hours of each other, so there isn't a delay where people can find out about the Symfony vulnerability, think, hey, Drupal uses Symfony, and try to hack it themselves. And this coordination with other open source projects has actually become a significant part of the work the security team does for core. Among all the Drupal 8 and 9 security releases we've had for date, 1 in 3 of them have involved our upstream dependencies. Now, this doesn't mean that our dependencies are any less secure than Drupal core. Theoretically, all other things being equal, we'd have the same number of vulnerabilities, even if we were the ones maintaining the code. But it does have an impact on how we schedule and ship releases. When we have a vulnerability in our own code, we can review and test the fix ourselves in advance of disclosure. We can bundle multiple security releases in a single release so that site owners don't have to apply so many updates month after month. So now I'm going to share a little story of a problem we ran into as a result of adopting those dependencies. And it's sort of a specific example of how core projects adds complexity. So as of Drupal 8.0.0 back in 2015, PHP 7 hadn't even actually been released yet. So we supported PHP 5.5 and 5.6, and we made our best effort to be compatible with PHP 7. Next. In July of 2016, PHP ended its official security coverage for 5.5. But through 2016 and 2017, even though PHP had stopped providing security fixes, 20% of all PHP websites were still using PHP 5.5. Now, keep in mind that distributions provide their own security patches for PHP versions that are used by their long-term support releases. And PHP 5.5 was used by Trusty Tar, which it's an Ubuntu release, which actually had security coverage all the way until April of 2019, just a year ago. Now, a site owner that's using that stack might reasonably expect their PHP 5.5 application to keep working. At the same time, in 2016 and 2017, many releases of those composer packages were starting to require PHP 7. Next. Gosh, I think he's advancing them before I actually say it, so maybe I should just stop saying it and wait a second to see if he reads my mind. So early in 2018, we announced that we would require PHP 7, starting with Drupal 8.7.0, which came out this past spring in May of 2019. Now, note that there was a risk in supporting PHP 5.5 for so long because it meant we had an increasing number of dependencies on old versions. We were weighing that against the risk of denying 20% of all Drupal sites any security updates at all, because you can't install an update if it adds system requirements that are no longer met. Good. Then in summer of 2018, months after we'd made our announcement about 8.7.0, we received a report of a URL rewrite and cache poisoning vulnerability that the researcher planned to disclose in August. This is a security researcher like Sam. Now, a colleague of mine researched the report and found that the vulnerable code was present both in Symfony and in several Zen framework libraries, including ZenFeed and Diactros, which are used by Drupal core. So we collaborated with the security teams of all 3 projects, as well as the researcher, to find a coordinated disclosure date that would work for everyone. And we came up with August 1st of that year. So we Drupal pretend this security release for it, labeled SA Core 2018-005. But then there was a problem. Very late in the process, I discovered that Zen Framework had also already dropped support for PHP 5.5 earlier in one of their minor releases, despite the fact that 20% of PHP sites were still using it at the time. So we couldn't update Drupal to require the secure versions for the release we'd helped coordinate because we didn't meet their PHP version requirements. Fortunately, it turned out that Drupal core itself was only vulnerable because of Symfony. We weren't exercising the vulnerable code in the Zen framework libraries at all, but it was a near miss. What if Drupal had actually been using the vulnerable code in Zen framework? We couldn't just drop support for PHP 5.5 during a security window. It would have caused mass chaos and panic. Can you imagine? Like, there's a security vulnerability and all of a sudden Drupal stops working entirely. Would we have tried at the last minute to convince maintainers of an upstream project to make a release contrary to their release policies? We have forked or overridden the library's vulnerable code and scrambled to backport their patches to the unsupported versions we were using. And what if backporting had taken days or weeks? And what would that mean for updating those libraries in the future? Even when we did eventually stop supporting PHP 5.5 and 5.6 and Drupal 8.7, there were a lot of complaints about it. Risk-averse sectors of Drupal's ecosystem, like government, education, and finance, vastly prefer long-term support releases. And all of our users, honestly, prefer an advanced schedule for releases. So we simply couldn't sustain making new major releases every time a dependency dropped support for an old PHP version. Can you imagine we'd be on like Drupal 18 by now? Next. So what we concluded as a result of this is that we have to set Drupal's major version PHP requirement as high as possible when the major is released. And that also kind of applies downstream as well. We try to use the most recent major version wherever possible for the new Drupal version that's coming out. So Drupal 9 requires PHP 7.3. We looked into actually requiring 7.4 for it, but unfortunately that simply wasn't practical because not enough host distributions and so forth support it yet. So requiring 7.4 would have caused potentially lack of interest in Drupal 9 when it came out if 25% of people couldn't update to it. We also don't know what we're going to do exactly about PHP 8, which is coming out this fall. Now we want Drupal 9 to support to be extended until the end of 2023, as you heard in the Dries note, but PHP 7.4 support ends in November of 2022. So we're going to have a stretch there for Drupal 9 where PHP 7.3 and 7.4 are end of life, but we're still trying to support them for Drupal. I'd love to see PHP extend security coverage for 7.4 an extra year, the way they did for PHP 5.6. But so far, they have repeatedly come down against it. Like I've asked about it. We've asked on their mailing lists and so forth. So that's going to be interesting. We'll see what happens. And then meanwhile, since dropping support for an old PHP version does a ton of work and disruptive for us, we're going to have to keep a close eye on our dependencies and consider forking any dependency that does drop support for PHP 7.3 before we're ready to. So that gives you sort of an idea of the conflicting sort of things that we have to balance. There are people who are like, oh, well, this dependency is out of date. This PHP version is old. Why do we even bother using it anymore? And then the opposite end, we have people who are like, Drupal updates things so fast. I can't keep up. I keep having to change my platform. And it's complicated to balance the needs of those different audiences. That's all I have.
Does anybody have any questions for us? Anybody up here around security?
There have been a few in the Slack that are probably worth.
Greg dropped off. Message is it possible to get there will be a no security updates notice even if on Twitter? We actually do that in the security questions channel on Slack. We don't publish it to Twitter because there'd be a lot of just no security updates this week. So if you are interested in that, we do post that in the security questions channel on Drupal Slack. Any other questions? We've got about 2 minutes left, maybe 3 if we stretch it a little bit. Great.
If you have a question that hasn't been answered yet, you could just repaste it at the bottom of the chat so that we can answer it. Because there's a lot of back scroll here. So feature, another thing about this platform that's not the. There was a question earlier about how many vulnerabilities there are and how quickly they get fixed. We don't disclose that information in general for a number of reasons. I'll just say that triage is an active process, and other disruptions like pandemics and so forth can make it take a bit longer to get stuff fixed.
Will we post the slides someplace? I will post the slides someplace, assuming we have a way to do that. I have no issue. I'm assuming we can attach them to the session notes. So
I think just a link to the Google slides if you do that.
I will. We'll get them posted to the session slides. Where are we? I'm sorry, I'm trying to read backwards.
Yeah, what changes have been made to avoid the situation of Drupal So I think we covered a lot of those in this presentation. So the Drupal Steward program is there in order to proactively monitor for anything that could be a very severe vulnerability affecting a lot of Drupal people at once. So that's sort of your first round of defense. The second round of defense is the automatic update initiative, which will allow, once it's completed, will allow you to get those security updates for situations like that occur. I think maybe there's also been some process changes and stuff like that, which I can't, but maybe Jess or Michael.
Actually, I think Sam was about to jump on that.
Well, I guess I wasn't sure if they were talking about the technical fix or not, but since Drupal, we've actually added this request filter to. Hey, Michael, do you mind muting while people are talking? Thanks. So we've added this request filtering that basically prevents attacks like that in the future. And it's a bit higher level than specific vulnerabilities. So that kind of vulnerability should be a lot harder in the future, even if there's a different exploit path. So that's kind of something since 2018 that we've done.
That in general, when we have a vulnerability that's reported, for core especially, we try to think about what other kinds of things are sort of implied by that vulnerability and see if there's a higher level where we should fix it, or if there's other related security vulnerabilities that we should bundle at the same time with it. And yeah, we've done a lot of work on improving our core release process over the past several years. It's a lot smoother than it used to be. It's still a little bumpy when there's dependency updates because there's a lot outside our control there. But we continue to improve in terms of process.
Tagging on to the automatic updates, Darren comments that he's concerned about file permissions from auto updates.
Yes, please come to our session. We will tell you all about all of the things that the Drupal security team has put a lot of thought into the architecture of automatic updates. We've taken lessons from other projects like WordPress and so forth, and we can get into the technical specifics of that in the automatic update session. I encourage you to come if you're available.
It should greatly reduce your concerns. That's the spoiler alert.
So we are 3 minutes past the hour. I want to thank everybody for coming today. We will be hanging out in the security questions channel and Drupal Slack. And we look forward to seeing you out there. Have a great afternoon, everybody, or afternoon my time at least. Enjoy the rest of your conference.